yeah, it was definitely the most real thing we heard the whole day. And
Yeah.
not to say that anyone else was fake,
Right.
but everyone else was prepared, and they had this message they were trying to get across, where you could tell she was just there to say what her heart was saying, right? Because she's like, she clearly had been working with Indigenous communities for a very long time. She's seen the devastation, she's seen the problems, and she's seen the ability of industry to help with that, and then the failure to do so for whatever reason. Again, this is a complicated subject. I'm not blaming industry necessarily. I'm just saying we need to step out of our own shoes and try something different. Because this is very, very clear that whatever we're doing is not enough. Right. Even if we see it as being more than it was. Yeah. It's not there yet. Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Christoph, and on this podcast we talk about the environment and the science that goes along with it. And today's episode is a really, really awesome episode. I recently went to a conference put on by the Canadian Institute of Forestry, and it was regarding Indigenous Consultation. So talking about involving Indigenous communities in forest management practices and trying to make sure that they're not left in the dust in the aftermath of it, make sure that their values, resources, and needs are met. And it was a really incredible conference. Like, there was all kinds of Indigenous speakers, industry speakers, government speakers, and a lot of perspectives found that I otherwise was unaware of, and it was really, really neat. So yeah, I got together with Nathan Lauer. He is a PhD student at the University of Alberta for plant stress physiology, so totally outside the realm of Indigenous consultation, but he explains how he got into it early in the conversation. He was the facilitator. He was the guy who got everybody together. He collaborated with a few other students, a few other people to try and put this conference together. And he came in. He wanted to have a kind of a review, kind of a conversation about what we talked about, what we learned. And I kind of make some jokes at the beginning because, I mean, it's maybe a little bit disingenuous for a couple of white dudes to be having this conversation. But I think we did an okay job. So I hope you guys like it. Talked about all kinds of cool stuff, so you guys are really good. You're gonna get something out of it, that much I guarantee. Sponsors for this episode, first and foremost, Wes Fraser. Without Wes Fraser, I wouldn't have the capacity to do this podcast the way I do it. So I really appreciate their support through the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta. I couldn't thank you guys enough. Yes, you've made this possible this year, so thank you. And also Greenlink Forestry. Greenlink Forestry has provided me with all kinds of other resources as well to make this possible, and I can't thank them enough as well. Damage Timber is the final sponsor. They are an apparel company, and 10% of everything they sell goes to a environmental sciences scholarship. So you're supporting environmental sciences through the sale of clothing, and they have all kinds of cool hats, toques, sweaters, neat stuff. Check them out, damagetimber.com. Put Your Forest 10 at checkout, and you can get 10% off. So all right, so leading up to this conversation, I actually recently stumbled across this theory in psychology, and it's called third space theory, and I definitely don't understand it completely, but just the gist of it, and I thought it applied really, really well to the situation regarding the communication between Indigenous communities and Western society. So third space theory, it regards individuals and their uniqueness as one entity. So there's two individuals, they're both unique entities with unique ideas and unique capacity to do certain things and accomplish certain goals. When those two individuals come together, they create a new entity, a third space, a place where things that weren't possible when individuals were apart are now possible when they're together. So I thought that was an interesting analogy for describing this current situation. We have a potential to take two groups of people, Western society and the government and industry and Indigenous communities, the multitude of different Indigenous communities, and to come together to form a new entity that can be there for the benefit of all of us, right? And it's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of hashing out. I'm not saying this is easy or simple or anything, but it's just an idea to go forward with this conversation. So, yeah, without any further messing around, let's get into it. Let's start talking with Nathan about Indigenous consultation and the crazy, crazy, deep, complex rabbit hole that is that conversation. So, yeah, here we go. One thing I was thinking about when you emailed me, I was like, is this going to be two white guys talking about Indigenous consultation? And I was like, Whitey McWhiterson. And
yeah. That is
William Willoughby sitting down to talk about.
Tell these Indigenous people how to manage their forests. But I just I don't know, kind of come in with humility, I guess. And I don't think anybody has all the answers, right? And I think there is, and I guess, a sense that we need to change things, right?
For sure.
And so, how do we do that? And I think, where do different ideas come from? Well, Indigenous people, they see things very differently, right? So
totally, yeah.
I think it's a great opportunity to just start building relationships, and I think we have a long way to go.
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, it's just kind of funny because I think about that sometimes, because it's just like some couple of white dudes being like, hey, so here's what we think, and like, I'm going to try my best to try to portray what was said in the conference from like the Indigenous people that were there and speaking, right? And I think that's the game plan. We'll sit down, we'll just kind of talk about what was kind of done, and then what we learned from it, and then kind of what the end goal, or kind of what the kind of conclusions were of the whole day, right? Like, it was a really, really successful. It was really successful. Like, really, I thought it was like very emotionally packed. Lots of good topics were brought up. Lots of good like opposing perspectives that were brought up.
Yeah, that's good.
How did you what got you originally interested in actually doing this?
Well, it wasn't my idea. It was student rep, Bailey Robinson. And she, basically, we have student reps on CIF come in. Sure. And they sit down and, sometimes they help organize different things or whatever. And she had the idea of Indigenous consultation. And that's just a big black box. And, I guess she was kind of citing her concerns about, not these issues being addressed in education. So the students are kind of going out of their way to find different things. And I guess, I don't want to name names or anything, but I guess she was working a summer job at one point and heard some kind of shouting match going on between, I guess, on the phone between forestry company employee and an Indigenous person, and I guess that kind of rubbed her the wrong way. So that was the original idea. And then me, I guess I should preface that, I'm an American, and I moved here in 2013, so I'm relatively new to Canadian culture, and in terms of Indigenous culture, I'm brand new to that. So I had to come in with a certain level of, I guess, curiosity and humility, and so we started brainstorming, and we had Amy Watton. She's on the council as well. Yeah. And we also had another undergraduate student, Kiera Stewart Shepherd. And we kind of sat down and started having a few meetings, different ideas, like what could come up. And like I said, this is just such an expansive topic. So we, like one of the papers we found was about how you can kind of combine like Indigenous knowledge with Western practices, and how can we kind of combine those two to kind of reduce the number of issues. And we're talking what is one issue that would be that, and we're like, oh well, wildfire, like fire suppression is a European forestry practice, and we're in a fire prone region, and we're having these mega fires, and I don't know, I think that was a big wake up call for me, was the fire at the end of May. I think it was May 29th, was when we had these huge smoke clouds running in.
I guess so was this your first summer in Canada then?
Oh no.
Oh no, okay, good.
This is I've been here since 2013. So
okay. So you've experienced that big cloud of smoke coming over before. It's not your first time. But
not that severe where it was like blacking out the sun and turning street lights on and
at 2 in the afternoon.
And you're thinking about it, and it's like, climate change is a big issue, but we're kind of in May, and I know the grasses are kind of dried out at that time, but like this is a lot of smoke. And then you start researching about like indigenous use of fire, how they would light fires on purpose and do smaller, more frequent fires instead of this huge buildup of fire. And so that was the issue that we wanted to focus on, looking like how would indigenous people do this differently. So that's where we had two of our speakers come from. And Patricia McCormick, who we'll talk about, she kind of came to me and was like extremely concerned, and I think thinks that, I guess, the indigenous use of wildfire is almost lost, and that knowledge is almost lost, and how the fire suppression has just caused huge forests, and it used to be kind of patchy grassworks and forests, right? And it would kind of make smaller fires, I'm assuming. So anyways, that was part of it, and then another thing was that was one topic, and then the other was success stories. What has worked in the past, and we're trying to keep it regional in the province of Alberta. But that was that. So a lot of the speakers kind of interesting. Matt Munson's actually, he was at the time he was my neighbor. And so I mean, I just started to reach out, and he was my neighbor, and we had known each other for a while, and he brought me two speakers, him and Andrew. Nice. So that was really helpful. And Sonia had been on a previous tech session for us, and and then I think Peggy Smith was Amy's teacher back at school a long time ago. Gotcha. So that was helpful. And Sweet. Then Heather, she actually started in June or July, I believe, at the Canadian Forest Service as the elder in residence. That was helpful because I didn't really know how to reach out to an elder or anything like that. I was kind of spinning my wheels on that for a couple of months. And then, she got the job there, and we met her, and that was
She's incredible. Like that was one of the first things I wanted to mention, was she was the first person to speak. She got up and kind of said a few words and said a prayer and that kind of stuff. And she really did it. Like, she's an incredible woman. Like, you can tell. Like she, like she says a couple of times during the conference, right? Like, she speaks from the heart, like only. Like, everything she says is from the heart. None of it's this flamboyant word soup that we Western society has a bunch of bullshit flown in there to make it sound pretty, right? She does it she just says it frankly, what it is, what she's feeling, and she's totally honest. And I loved it because she came right out of the bat just talking about this isn't about blame, this isn't about apologies, this is about the future, this is about building relationships with patience, kindness, respect, and just kind of awareness of the entirety of the whole comprehensive problem. Because she set a really good tone of being like, hey, we're all here together. We're all treaty people, right? That was one of the things I think Jacob said, was that we're all treaty people. And this is not just, the treaties don't just apply to indigenous groups, they apply to all of us. These are, this is an agreement between sovereign nations, and I think that a lot of that's kind of been lost, right? Yeah.
And I guess her topic of how people are thinking more in kind of short term and me first, and that kind of society, and in my opinion, a bit of a sociopathic behavior, but we'll talk about that another time. But and talking, not placing blame, and what's in the past is in the past. And I think if people kind of have good hearts and go forward, we can kind of reverse, some of the things. Some of the things that we've done, or that past people have done.
For sure.
It's a big, interesting topic, that's for sure.
For sure. Oh, no kidding. But she set a really good tone for the whole thing, I think, to start everyone off, make everyone feel comfortable, know that we're all here to try and collaborate and try and find a solution to this problem. We're all coming from different perspectives, have different ideas of what this is and what the end result's going to be.
Right.
But I think it set a good tone. And then...
Absolutely.
Yeah, she was great. And then Peggy coming in, Peggy Smith, right?
Right.
What's her background again? I forget now.
So she is a professor emeritus at Lakehead College, and she was teaching kind of like an indigenous course on indigenous people. Yes. And I guess she's really involved with the Ontario Professional Foresters.
Okay.
And I know they're compared to like the Alberta Professional Foresters, the Ontario they just have way more people and like way more funds and deeper pockets, so they could do bigger projects like the one that she was doing. And I think they're I guess kind of Indigenous relations at this point is far more advanced, and I think could be kind of a guideline for other provinces.
Well, that was the very first thing that she talked about, right? I mean, she talked about all kinds of things. She started with inherent rights and all kinds of, one of the big things, I guess, to start off, I suppose, to set the scene for this whole conversation was both Heather and Peggy talked about residential schools and, the mistreatment of Indigenous people, by the Canadian government and like Canadians in general for centuries, right? And the impact that has multi-generationally, and kind of to try to give the Western society, like the Western people there, that perspective. Because I think that's one of the biggest disconnects in this whole conversation is like, you got, the Western culture being like, well, just come on, like just do this. What are you waiting for? Come on, let's
just a little bit. Don't worry. Let's
communicate. Like let's do this. And then, but they don't have the trust. Like every time that they've trusted a white dude, it's ended horribly for their entire community. So it's like, you can't blame them for not having like full trust and awareness.
Right.
And when you come at them with contracts and this kind of stuff, and you don't even, they don't even know who you are. Like, of course it's going to fail. Right. So, but she started off with that history of Indigenous communities in Canada and the huge amount of injustice that's been done to them. And that was a good way to start this conversation. But then she got into the huge lack of, I guess, Indigenous teachings in like post-secondary,
right,
when it comes to forestry and that kind of
right.
stuff. I didn't have anything.
Really?
I mean,
really?
Speaking to that as well, I remember in elementary school, like I grew up in northern Alberta, I don't remember learning anything about residential schools or like any of the cultural genocide that happened, right? So it's interesting that it took me to university to actually find it. It wasn't because of university courses. It was just because someone I knew, I think, brought it up, and I started learning about it, right? And it wasn't until very, very recently, like last maybe 5 years, where I've really understood as much as I possibly can, as someone who hasn't been through it, the context of that, and tried to empathize with it in a real way.
Yeah,
right?
and it's pretty serious, and I don't know, it kind of reminds me of I don't know if this is too harsh of a comparison, but I took a trip to South Africa a couple of years ago, and they were talking about the apartheid that was going on there. And I think a lot of basically what our tour guide was saying was how a lot of people would kind of vote for it and maybe not realize they're voting for it or whatever, but there's some kind of like disconnect, like, oh, this is a bad situation, but I'm not doing it. It's the government doing it. And I think, a lot of people, when elections come around, the circus comes to town and they vote and then kind of go back to their daily life and don't really realize what's, why Indigenous people are, getting pretty upset over things. And
totally.
and if it's not in the curriculum and if it's not being talked about, then we're gonna have problems. But I think a lot of the youth are kind of more keen on this and such. And I was talking with someone with the Alberta professional foresters, and she said that obviously Alberta has a long way to go, but in BC, essentially every course that they take in forestry, there's some kind of Indigenous component to it. And so it's not like there's these separate courses. It's in every course. It's kind of a part of it, right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting idea.
Well, it's an awesome idea. Like, I think I mean, this was a while ago now. It was 8 years ago when I graduated. So it's 2012, right? And up until that point, I don't remember any kind of conversation around Indigenous culture or the history of Indigenous people in my forestry courses. And I'm not even blaming the professors or the organization for that, because for all I know, they were just as ignorant as I was, right? So but I think now that it's in the open, now that we know, now that this is something that's commonly talked about and isn't just this hidden secret,
right? I
think, and I don't know how it's changed since then. The U of A might have put a bunch of stuff in there, and we heard someone at the conference that there was a free course that the U of A was providing.
Yeah, a massive open online course, the MOOC. It's Indigenous Canada, I believe, is the name of it. So people can go and register for free, and it was one of the most successful and popular online courses so far. So I've yet to take it, but that's on the agenda here.
I only found out about it on Thursday, so I'm not blaming myself.
What are we waiting for?
Yeah. And but it's I think that was one of the very first issues that was brought up, was that there isn't any formal education around this, and it's expected to just come through word of mouth, which is a huge problem. Because I mean, this is, you know, I mean, as foresters or as land managers and that kind of stuff, it's our responsibility first and foremost to protect the public good, right? This is we're there for the public. It's a public resource. We're there to protect the public good, and if we can make money while doing that, great. But if we can't, then you can't sacrifice the public good for that. And part of that is, a huge part of that is Indigenous culture and Indigenous inherent rights.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that that isn't being taught, at least in Alberta, it wasn't really being taught. It might be now. I don't know. I can't say. When I went, it wasn't. It might be now. But yeah, that's real concerning, right? Like I think we learn about silviculture and soil, and we learn about dendrology and pests, and we learn about weather and ecosites, and we learn about all this stuff. And economics and like stats and math and all this stuff, but we don't learn about something we're going to run into on a daily basis. And it's like there's a weird another disconnect, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, if you if you ignore these issues, there's problems like lawsuits and things like that arise. And so it's I think one of the themes of the conference was kind of starting the consultation process early and including them and in planning and things like that. And I think there is a way that we can all kind of work together and kind of be in harmony and kind of getting new ideas like from Indigenous people. Because I know that there are Indigenous people who, are forestry and such, right? And there's room for, economic development and ways to collaborate and partner. So, I don't think that there's, I think there's room for improvement for sure, especially in education.
I think like at the end of the conference, everyone, a lot of what was coming out, like especially from Fabian Gray, was talking about how he's like, we can do this, and it can be a benefit for everybody. It's going to be more complicated. It's going to be different. It's not going to be the system we have now, like the whole system, right? Might have to change, but it can be of great benefit to everyone. We can have all of these resources benefit from this collaboration. But right now, yeah, it's interesting, but there's a long ways to go towards that, right? Like I think something that came up that was really, kind of one of the big themes of the whole conference that I kind of gathered over the course of the day was the massive disparity in perspective when it comes to where we think, like where the foresters and Western society thinks they're at, and where the Indigenous communities think this is at.
Right.
Because I think we've seen a massive amount of increase in Indigenous consultation ideas and discussion in the forestry community. I think we all are it's something we're talking about now. It's something that's going on. And there's all kinds of policies now in the government and all kinds of formalities to go through it. And I think the general feeling, I don't mean to be mean to the forestry community, but I think it's a lot of us patting ourselves on the back, going, we are doing way more than we were before.
Right.
But it's very, very, very clear from that conference that from the Indigenous people's perspective, we haven't even scratched the surface.
Right.
From their perspective, nothing's changed yet. It's just us glad-handing ourselves. Not really. And I don't mean to say everybody's doing this. There are companies and there are people who are doing a lot of this. I'm not trying to paint everyone with the same brush, but I just mean there was a lot of emotion in that conference, especially from a certain couple individuals.
I agree.
And it was very clear that something needs to change because they're seeing something that the industry and the government is not seeing. Right.
And I think one of the big things I learned is that they one of my conversations with Heather before the conference, and she gets this question all the time where basically someone asks like, well, why do you say that it's your land, but it's also the creator's land? And how can you say it's the creator's land and your land? And, what does that mean? And she said, well, the creator gave us this land to protect. And so that's when it kind of clicked for me that, maybe when they're speaking up and things like that, it has like real concerns. And you look at, some of the Indigenous communities that are suffering in our province, and you have issues like massive wildfires like rolling in through the communities, or, water insecurity or food insecurity. And it's like, there's, is that all because of forestry operations? Like, no, obviously there's other things like oil and gas and agriculture and,
a history of mistreatment. Right?
Yeah. And just like a kind of like a degradation of land use and such. And I think that it's just kind of reaching a tipping point. And and hopefully, we can kind of get on it before things get worse.
Totally. Well, I think there's a huge amount of desire from, I think, the forestry perspective and from, like, Western culture's perspective to want to do this. And the question is, nobody really knows how, right? Because we also don't want to step on Indigenous people's rights and tell them, like, hey, we got the thing figured out, like, come on with us. It's like, no, that's you're missing the point.
Right.
You're supposed to be working with them. This is supposed to be a collaborative effort.
Right.
They know a lot of stuff that we don't know
exactly
about, what I mean, about the ecology of the forest and how things work in their own culture, right? And for us to assume that we have the power because we're in government and we got the whatever is super dishonest and
yeah, it's arrogant. I
it's
think.
arrogant, right? Like, it is. It's interesting that we just see, like, well, we're part of the cult, like we have the power structure. So, like, we're the professionals, right? It's something that Amy Christensen and I spoke a lot about on the Good Fire podcast, was that, right? Talking about how a lot of it is, if you got a PhD, you're the professional. You're the one who knows everything, and you've got all the knowledge, right?
Right.
And from the Indigenous perspective, they're like, well, how about I've been doing this my entire life,
right?
And I probably know more than you when you were scratching your paper on, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
So
yeah.
It's and there's a huge point there, right? Like, there's again a disconnect,
right,
somewhere.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we talked about was, I guess, how knowledge is different between Western culture and Indigenous culture, and I don't think we mentioned it in the actual tech session, but there's knowledge keepers that kind of hold the knowledge on where the herds are and where the medicine plants are and things like that, and then it's kind of a secret, right? And I don't know if that's just a cultural thing or if it's like a mistrust of Western society, but then, like, our culture is just, open source everything, put it out on the internet. So I remember Fabian talking about that, how he had put some of his, some of the locations and everything into GIS, and his elders, didn't really like it that much. And I think that's, I guess, how knowledge is treated. And I guess in Western society, when knowledge is more, look what I figured out, look what I discovered, and all of this, where I guess they think that the knowledge is already out there and you're just kind of a transient, like, physical embodiment of it. And when you figure something, did we discover electricity or invent it, kind of thing, that the knowledge is already out there, and then it's not really owned by anyone. So
for sure,
I think that's kind of an important cultural difference to note.
For sure. And that all ties back to the mistrust, right? And the mistreatment, right? So, like, you can't expect somebody, a group of people who have been abused for so long and are still reaping the consequences of that abuse to all of a sudden just be like, yeah, sure, we'll share everything with you. That's fine. Yeah. It's like, no, that's unreasonable. You have to start with a relationship. You have to go to them, show that you're honest and you care. You're not just here because from their perspective, you're just there for the, to make dollar bills out of the wood. Right. And that's what it looks like, right? Unless you go in and talk to them and talk about, like, something that Jacob talked about really early on. Where was Jacob? Jacob Handel.
Right.
And, he was talking about the commonalities, right? Like, go into these communities and speak with the people there and maybe try to figure out where you're similar, right? Like, one thing he pointed out was I don't know what this is exactly, but there's some kind of common management idea in Indigenous culture around 7 generations. You're managing for 7 generations. I don't know the context of that.
Basically just big decisions and such need to be thought of. How is this going to affect, my descendants 7 generations in the future?
Right.
And that lines up pretty well with like a forest management plan around 200 years. Right. So I think that's another kind of common thing that we could work on.
For sure. The long-term thinking, right? Thinking about, like, the long term and what's going to happen down the road if we do this, what's the impact, right? And then also, like, I see myself as attempting to be a steward of the land, and the Indigenous people see themselves as being steward of the land. And there's similarities there, and they're going to be different, but there's similarities. We both see ourselves as wanting to protect the ecology and the sustainability of the landscape, and in different ways, but there's that commonality there.
Right. Yeah. And that was, cause that was one of the questions in the panel discussion at the end was what, cultural differences. And Fabian said there aren't any.
Yeah.
He said, we all have to put, food on the table.
Yeah.
And I think that's a kind of a good thing. So I think most, most people want to, make the world a better place and such. And
Totally.
I mean, there are greedy people out there and such.
But, you don't say.
Some of them. But yeah, I think we can kind of work around that and try to find some way to get along.
Yeah. I like Fabian for that. He says it like he sees it. He doesn't hold any punches, but he also understands that like we're all people. We're all in this together. Right? Like, this is all we just need to find a way to agree upon some things where we can work together and not be at odds. Right. And it's like some more of those commonalities were, relating to forestry, right? Was like Indigenous people used fire all the time, like you were said before. They used fire to work the land for berry production or for moose habitat or whatever. They would create grazing land for bison and that kind of stuff. And now we've got this homogeneous forest cover where a lot of this, this heterogeneous patches used to be. And whereas, as foresters, we're trying to emulate wildfire by harvesting. So there's similarities there. We're trying to create open patches, and we're not creating grassland. So there's obviously vast differences between burning and taking timber off of land. But there's similar processes in thinking, right?
Yeah, I think there is a commonality there. And then if you could harvest and create like fire breaks or even harvest and maybe even turn it back to a grassland. And, we talk about caribou and how important caribou are, but then bison, there's way less bison in the country. And, that doesn't get a lot of attention. And that was, a pretty substantial food source. And now we have, all these cattle, which are, again, of European descent. And the actual original ancestor of the cow is extinct. So it's just some weird domesticated animal that we have. And maybe bison work better on the landscape here. And maybe it's tastier.
Yeah, definitely tastier. But yeah, there was a really good point that Jacob brought up, though, was that those commonalities and part of the building of relationships, and that it's, it's our responsibility as foresters. We have the ability to go to these communities and make these changes, right? And we should be doing it. It's part of our responsibility as land stewards to try to include all values. Right. And this is a huge gap in that.
Yes.
And obviously, with all of this context, everything that we've been talking about, there's obviously there's historically been a lot of problems with, industry trying to communicate with Indigenous groups for a lot of different reasons. Right. And so it's not like I'm saying like, hey, get out there and just do it. It's like, no, we're talking about this because people have been trying to do it. Yeah. And it's been failing miserably. Right. So not to say that this hasn't been happening and people aren't trying to do the right thing. This is obviously a wildly complex subject that is taken us a long time to figure out, and we're still not even close to it. But we need to continue to have these conversations and include everybody to try and build as much perspective as possible.
Yeah, and it can be done. It's just I think because our system of coming in and kind of doing things, and I guess the Indigenous people have their inherent rights from the Creator, and then we come in with all these rules and regulations and courts and lawyers, and now all of a sudden the country's run by lawyers, and then it's just kind of a big cultural divide here. But yeah, I don't know. I have hope, and I think I think they're speaking up, not only for their own people, but for our culture and society as well. And I think they know that there's something inherently wrong with our culture when it's just based on infinite growth and infinite consumption and things like that. So
not living with the land, just kind of consuming until it's
right. And so there have been positives in terms of sustainability and everything like that, but on that front we also have a very far way to go.
For sure. And it's one kind of thing, going back to Peggy Smith, one thing that she said right near the end, she was asking questions of the entire group. She said, are we asking too much of foresters to do this consultation? Is this something that they are not sufficiently prepared to do properly?
Right.
And I think there's a lot of opinions on that, right? And I think I don't think we're asking too much of foresters personally. I think this is something that should be part of our knowledge base. And if it's not part of our knowledge base, then we need to seek that out.
Right.
To try to build that capacity to do that, because we are the ones who can make this change happen, right?
Right.
We have the communication, with direct communication with the government all the time, with the industry, we can try to. It's easier for us to do it than for an Indigenous consultation person to show up at the mill and go, "Hey, I want to talk about this," because they're gonna shut you out. It's not going to be that straightforward because they don't know exactly who you are. They don't know. So we have the capacity to make those changes and force that upon the system by being loud and by talking about it.
Yep. Starting the conversation is really important, and I think it's really important because the provincial government was kind of trying to revamp the policy and thinking that it wasn't really because the previous policy wasn't really working too well, and it was just kind of like, we need to get Indigenous consent, get them to check the box or whatever, and we're legal to go through that. And I think all parties realized that it wasn't really working too well. But then I was kind of disappointing to hear that in the change of government recently that they have decided to discontinue the revamping of the policy, and they're kind of sticking to the old one. So then where does the change come from? And that it has to come organically, from the bottom, right? And I think when we're talking with Indigenous communities and our forestry operations, have to keep in mind that there are human rights that we need to consider as well. And that's, I think if kind of people take that into consideration, I think we can kind of make some positive change.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. And that's just it, right? I think there's been a knowledge base. I think Peggy might be right in saying that, are we asking too much of foresters in the past? I think this is something that we weren't prepared for. We didn't know, not that we weren't willing, not that these people aren't good people trying to do the right thing.
Right.
It's that they were literally ignorant of this problem up until very recently. And now I don't think you can claim ignorance anymore.
Yeah.
If you're claiming ignorance at this point, then you're probably not doing your due diligence as you know what I mean? A land steward, right?
Just all the information we have now with the internet, the advent of the internet, and having just pretty much everything at our fingertips, and then with drones and people starting to use AI and all this technology, we could use the technology as a tool to kind of enhance forest management and things like that. But
sure.
I think Indigenous folks need to be included into this. And I guess kind of a personal story of mine, I helped organize a previous tech session on based on climate change and risk. And I thought of everything, all these different factors, and I didn't even think about Indigenous people once, and that was just a huge. I was like, "There's people there." I can't believe I missed that. I was trying to think of everything. What about invasive species? What about the caribou? What about this? What about that? And I'm like, there's people living on the land too, and they're using it. So that was kind of a stark realization from my perspective.
Totally. Oh, I feel you, man. I'm by no means perfect at all in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I have huge gaps in understanding and huge biases. Right. I think everybody does, and I think most people on the landscape and most companies are trying to do the right thing, but we don't know what the right thing is.
Right.
That's where the disconnect is between Indigenous communities and the industry, right? It's just what do you want? What do you want?
Right.
How do we make that the same thing?
Right.
Right. It's a crazy question to ask of. So I get what Peggy was saying when she said, are we asking too much of foresters? I get that, but I think the overwhelming consensus was that I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. And what they did was they developed basically a framework for, I'm assuming it was for kind of getting RPFs competent in that field. And they had to know the treaty rights and cultural rights and things like that, and be really familiar with all these Indigenous things. And it is quite a bit. But I think again, if early on education in college and things like that, I think it's a hurdle that can be easily overcome.
Well, yeah, in every course you just include, in dendrology, right? You go through and you include, instead of just saying oh, this is the plant, this is where it grows. Good enough. You say this is what it can be used for,
right?
And you're not gonna be able to extract that from Indigenous communities, obviously. But you can. There's a lot of it that we know already, just from you know what I mean. We create acetaminophen from willow and whatever, right?
Right.
But we can take that the next step and include how did Indigenous communities, how did Indigenous people relate with this resource, and right, and you can just add that to every course, right, including adding a course or a bunch of courses about, you know, the history of Indigenous people and why this communication between these two groups is so complicated.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a complex history, and the University of Alberta does have courses, but they're not really in the Department of Renewable Resources, and I'm pretty sure this is on their on the radar at the University of Alberta.
Oh, for sure. We are not the first ones to talk about this. This
Right.
has definitely been around for a long time. Definitely.
Right. So I think in the next few years they'll start introducing courses and things like that. I hope so. I hope they're listening at the U of A. And
I'm sure there's people there that have been trying to do this for a while. And it's just, I mean, now they got cutbacks and all kinds of stuff. So how do you? It's tough. I get it there, and this needs to happen, right?
Yep.
While Jacob was speaking, there was the woman who stood up and kind of spoke her piece, and that she was kind of a phantom. Nobody really knew who she was when I was asking her around the table.
She wasn't wearing a name tag. She had this plan for a while, I think.
Yeah, and Fabian knew her apparently, but she stood up and spoke her piece, and she had a very emotionally fueled, speech.
Yep.
Right. And she was, and it caught a lot of people off guard, including myself. I was standing literally 10 feet from her,
right.
and she was staring at me a bunch of the times, and I'm like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But anyways, she gave an incredible speech, and it was completely warranted and fair. Yeah. Like it's hard for us to hear because I think we see ourselves as good guys trying to do the right thing.
Right.
But very clearly, I guess I should explain what she said, but she had a lot of frustration. She used the word disgust a lot of times, and she was very, very frustrated. And because she was personally involved with, I'm not sure which communities she was with, but I think she was with quite a number. I think she represented a treaty. I'm not sure.
Okay.
And from her perspective, all the work that we've been doing and everything that's been trying to be done to help Indigenous communities is not trickling down to the communities.
Right.
So we're having the conversation, but it's not happening for them. They're not seeing the benefit of that. And she was the one who kind of like opened my eyes for the rest of the day. And I was like, okay, she provided a lot of perspective for me.
Yeah. This is serious.
Oh, totally. It's like very emotionally charged.
Right.
And fair, totally fair.
Yep.
And, It was interesting for that to happen because I think it was perfect. I love that it happened because it provided, I think, some people who maybe were in there with their own kind of biases and frustrations from government or industry side, having a difficult time communicating with Indigenous communities,
right,
for whatever reason. They may have seen a different side of that,
right?
Where is this frustration coming from?
She definitely made it awkward, and that's one of the things that's good. And just I guess an anecdote. I was in charge of keeping everything on time and everything. That was my main goal, and I was trying to track the time and everything, and noticed we had an hour and 15 minutes for lunch, and so I was like, okay, we can cut that down to an hour, and I'm gonna let her speak her mind because I looked in her eyes and there's no way I was getting the microphone from her. I was gonna let her say exactly whatever she needed to say, and I think one of the things she was talking about was how I guess the government entity, the Aboriginal Affairs Office, was there for industry purposes, and that it's just there to kind of check the box off and kind of go forward. And I think she brought to a lot of people's attention that there's people that are suffering in these communities. And is it just forestry? Is it just is it oil and gas? Is it, it's probably just combined, just everything.
Well, it's not any one industry. It's our society as a whole. But we as industry professionals, we can change our portion of that. Exactly.
Right? And I think it's a long, slow, messy process, a lot of wrong turns and everything, but I think hopefully we can start getting things into a better direction. I'm glad she spoke up because I think there's a lot of people who live in comfort and they don't realize that just not too far from here there's people that are really suffering. I'm glad she spoke up. That was spicy.
It was definitely the highlight of the day for sure. She was it was definitely the most real thing we heard the whole day. And
Yeah.
not to say that anyone else was fake,
Right.
but everyone else was prepared, and they had this message they were trying to get across, where you could tell she was just there to say what her heart was saying, right? Because she's like, she clearly had been working with Indigenous communities for a very long time. She's seen the devastation, she's seen the problems, and she's seen the ability of industry to help with that, and then the failure to do so for whatever reason. Again, this is a complicated subject. I'm not blaming industry necessarily. I'm just saying we need to step out of our own shoes and try something different.
I think
this
so.
is very, very clear that whatever we're doing is not enough.
Right.
Even if we see it as being more than it was.
Yeah.
It's not there yet.
Yeah, and I think hopefully it kind of woke some people up. I was kind of scanning the audience, and there was a lot of blank expressions there, and I don't think some people were prepared for that, but I'm glad it happened. It was maybe it kind of jarred a few people, and maybe taking.
I think it jarred everybody. It jarred me too, man. I was like, oh man.
Yeah, I was scared. So so that's good. I think we need that, and I haven't been to any conference or technical session where something like that happened. So yeah. I see it as a positive.
It was a positive, absolutely. This whole point is building relationships and seeing perspectives.
Right.
And we're sitting there as industry and government professionals and academics and that kind of stuff, being in Western society, we have our perspective of like, yes, we're doing things, and we're accomplishing stuff and social justice, and yes, us.
Yep.
And then she's like, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
This is effing crazy. Like, you guys aren't, like, this is not trickling down. Like, it's it may have been like, whether it was fair or not, I don't know, but I think it was definitely, you can't discount the fact that she's saying what she's seeing, and she's having the response that she's having because of some horrible problems that she's seeing, right? Like, it's just definitely, that's her reality.
Yeah.
And that's a perspective of somebody who it seems like she understood the system enough to know what's going on, right?
Right. She's certainly informed. That's for sure. She wasn't just some Yahoo coming out of the, and just speaking her mind. She definitely had some informed opinions, and I wish she would have stayed for longer. I wish
she would have stayed too, because I would have loved to have talked to her and just see how, because I think there is genuine concern. Like, when you see a person hurting, you want, what can we do? How can we help? Like, of course, there's all kinds of bureaucracy and paperwork and policy and all this shit, and that's part of the problem that she was pointing out, right? She's like, you're categorizing us. You're putting us into this process. And she's like, we're goddamn people. Just just come and talk to us and have a relationship and communicate like a person.
Right.
Don't treat us like a box to be checked off.
Right. Exactly.
Or something, a group to go to at the 11th hour of planning.
Right.
And say, hey, this is our plan. Like, what do you think? And then just say, well, that's what we're doing, so don't worry about it. But this is something that needs to be included at the very beginning, like you said, the planning stage.
Right.
Not consultation. This shouldn't be. And that was interesting for me. I never thought about that. I think she also said she was disgusted at the word consultation, or I think it was her. I can't remember.
Go on.
Somebody said it, and it was like the word consultation, and she described it more, and I was like, oh, I see. And what she was saying, I think, if I can try to speak for her, which might be problematic, but I think what she was saying was that the consultation, just, I think in a lot of people's mind, is like, okay, we've talked with them, we've let them know what our plan is, right? What she was saying was, no, this needs to be a collaborative process, planning. Again, I'm repeating myself, but it's from the very beginning, not at the end.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's a big take-home message from the day was planning early. And Matt Munson actually spoke on that too. That was the secret to successful relations: was start early, don't do it in the 11th hour. And I think there's a lot of people that are willing to work with like foresters. And it's just developing those relationships and not going in with this I gotta put up with the natives and get their consent and all of that. Just like, no, like, make friends with them.
Have some compassion, have some empathy, right? I think empathy is a big part of the day too. We're starting to realize that knowing something and having sympathy or whatever, right, for that thing that happened, knowing about it is not enough.
Right.
You need to empathize. You need to put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
Try to see things from their perspective in a way that changes your perspective. If you've decided that you've got the answers and you're not willing to learn anymore, then this is not the place for you. Like this we need to be continually challenging our viewpoints, because none of us know what the hell is going on.
Right.
And hopefully, if we can collaborate, we can get a better view of reality.
Yeah,
right?
and we, and you look at the, the reality of the planet, that we're, human activity is causing a mass extinction, on a global scale, and so there's something wrong with our, pathology, where we're doing this. So I'm thinking that, collaborating and, reaching out to Indigenous communities is maybe one way to help reverse that, and help promote biodiversity and things like that.
Yeah, it's tough. It's so complicated. It's wild.
Yeah, we got a tough doozy on our hands for the future. That's for sure. So I think it's an exciting interface. I think everything that we're having to accomplish.
Sure. There was one when Vince. Piemonte,
yes.
Piemonte. When he stood up, and he's from the Aboriginal. What's the group he's from? Again?
I think it's Aboriginal Affairs Office.
Yeah, or something like that. He's from the government, anyways. And he was giving his speech about the whole consultation, the paperwork and the bureaucracy behind it, right? And how they're trying to, and that's how our system works. So I mean, that's how I get why that is seen as a fixer. And there probably needs to be some of that, but there needs to be a lot more of like groundwork. But one thing that he was talking about was a concern that came up from one of the people at the conference, one of the industry representatives, was like, we go out and we try to do this consultation, and we try to communicate with Indigenous groups and say, hey, here's where we're planning on harvesting this year, and they want to go look at every single block, and we can't afford to pay for them to go to every single block, and we need to cut those blocks before, what I mean? We have a timeline.
Right,
this needs to be done. We can't spend 7 months waiting for them to go look at it. And it's like, well, that's, and the frustration I saw with that was like, well, you shouldn't be giving them the minimum amount of time. You should be telling them, this is why you tell them at the beginning. You know years ahead of time when you're going to be cutting where. Right. You give them enough time, they can see this on their own. They can try and check it out. But I understood his frustration was that we're trying to do this. Mm-hmm. The Indigenous communities need funding in order to, to be a part of this system.
That was a question by from Vince's talk. That was a question by Fabian, correct? Is that
no? It wasn't by Fabian. I thought it was someone else, but I thought it was an industry representative. But maybe Fabian. No, Fabian followed up. Followed up on that question.
Yeah, saying that it's just difficult. There's not the funding to go out and check all of the sites beforehand, right?
Right. Okay. Well, and Fabian's an exception as well, because he's one person who has like a full understanding of GIS that I don't think that's super common in Indigenous communities, right? Like they're starting to, but I mean, it's from what Fabian's told me is that's not common,
right? And
so he has the capacity to look and see what sites are important, and he can go look at those and not worry about the others, right? But I think that capacity doesn't exist in a lot of different communities, and part of the thing I was thinking about, anyways, to try and get to my point around this was that, like, in order to be part of the system and part of the solution, these communities need like economic incentives, same as any community.
Right. Exactly.
And part of that, if they're going out to check on potential harvest blocks, right, just check on their resources and see if any of their resources are going to be infringed upon, they're only doing that because we're going in and removing the fiber. They wouldn't be doing that otherwise. So whose responsibility is it to pay for them to go out and do this type of stuff? Is it the band? I don't know. Is it the industry?
Right.
I don't know. Is it the government? I don't know whose responsibility it is, but I think one solution that I thought would be interesting, and I know nothing about any of this, but I don't see why it couldn't be part of royalties, like part of timber royalties that companies pay, right? Part of that is collected by the government and by FRIA and that kind of stuff. Part of that maybe shouldn't go to these communities, because they in order to meaningfully participate.
Yeah, they need money to, and access to resources and things to get out there. And
because a lot of them have jobs. They're not like they're going out to look at these. They're just like us. Like if I asked you, like, okay, you have to take a week off of your job. We're not going to pay you, but you can go look at these resources, and it'll help your people down the road. It's like, well, I have to put food on the table, and I have to.
Right.
They have jobs the same as us. Like they can't just ditch it. So they need to be able to you know what I mean?
To get out there and check it out. And it's I think another issue that needs to be addressed. And there's obviously room for improvement. And hopefully there's a lot of people listening to this, and they can, there's other people who can have solutions and things like that. So
and I don't know what's been tried. I don't know I've never done a philosophical breakdown of whose resources and who's benefiting and who's getting the profit and who gets to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who should be paying for what. But I think, I'm sure someone out there does and has and knows what a reasonable solution to this problem is, because there's frustration on both sides about this. And again, disconnect. We need to connect these dots and figure out how to provide the potential and opportunity for communities and industry to meaningfully engage in consultation and conversation,
right? And hopefully where all parties benefit, right? So
exactly,
it works for all parties, and it works for the environment and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
It's interesting. It's crazy complicated.
Huge black box. Very interesting issue. That's for sure.
I wonder if this whole podcast is just word soup for people, or just
it's that's just how the day went, I guess. There's a lot of topics, just jam-packed day, that's for sure.
You could do this. You could do this, for a year. You could take courses upon courses upon courses and never. This is all up in the air, right? We're not really sure how to fix this problem, but this is why we need to have the conversation, because people have ideas to maybe do this. And there are really good things going on. Like there are lots of industries or lots of companies trying new things, right? Stepping out of their comfort zone and doing things that they're not used to doing and don't know how to do, and collaborating with chiefs and with the municipalities and with other people to try to figure this out. And it's awesome to see that that's happening.
Right.
But it's clear that a lot of those are still failing for whatever reason, whether it's, we don't know.
Yeah.
But
I think maybe both cultures are still trying to feel each other out, because it's been a pretty insane history. Right. So, there is some mistrust there. And, I think if, it's good-hearted people, then it can.
I think everyone's good-hearted. I think everyone's coming at this, or most people, I should say, are coming at this from the right desire. They want to do good, right? They're good-hearted. They like people. They want people to do well. But it's the misunderstanding of the whole thing. And one thing, Andrew DeVries,
he's talking. He's from Tolko.
And he was talking about this big. What do you call it? Program that they had created, and
the Northwest collaboration, right? Northwest Alberta collaboration. Yeah.
And they collaborated with, I think it was 3 different Indigenous communities,
right?
And municipalities, and I think there was energy in there, and there was.
I think so. Alberta Energy Regulator was involved, I think.
Yeah, there was capacity. There was a lot of people at the table, right? And it was going really well. Mm-hmm. Or all the programs, all the things they were trying to do for a few years, and then it fell apart for one reason or another.
Yeah, fell apart in September. So that was after I had confirmed the Andrew as a speaker.
Oh,
so
so it just fell apart. Oh,
in September, and now we are in November, right? Yeah. So I think that was a pretty big. I don't think he was planning for that when he agreed to give the talk. So props to him for sticking with it, and still, I guess they're still trying to dissect what had happened. But it sounded like there was a lot of positives there. I remember him trying to reach out to the communities, and I guess one of the issues that they had to be kind of attach themselves to other events, because it's like, oh, hey, everybody, let's get together and we're going to talk about forestry. Nobody, really cared. So they would find other community events and kind of get in and try to find people that way and outreach and things like that. And
that's awesome. That's great. I think I saw a lot of benefits and positives from what they were doing. Unfortunately, it ended up being a failure in the end, but I don't think it was. That's true. I don't think it was a failure. I think the program, of course, it would have been great if it kept going, but I guarantee you, they've learned a whole bunch about how to do this the wrong way.
Yeah, try to find some positives out of it, and
for sure
move forward. And I think one of the themes of his talk was talking about a quote from Warren Buffett. Talking, if you're playing golf and you hit a hole in one every time, it wouldn't be much fun. But if you get in a rut and you gotta get out of a sand trap or whatever, then it makes it more exciting. So that was one of the themes. Okay, yeah, we made some kind of mistake and got to kind of dissect, and but that's just, I think, part of the kind of relationship building and collaboration. But I saw some positives where they were like training some of the younger people on like quads and just some kind of forestry operations, and also. I lost my train of thought. So you can.
But yeah, no, you're right. Exactly. They're getting the Indigenous youth out into the bush and doing some of the some bend and break, some silviculture stuff, and they were getting them out, training them up on how, helping them to get to incorporate themselves into Western society if they so choose to, and then, be able to build training and skills and that kind of stuff. And I saw lots of benefits. Like, it was all really, really great, I thought. And I think some of the takeaway points that Andrew had said was that there needed to be more direct reporting to the chiefs, because I think it sounded like that they may have felt that they were not quite running the show. They were kind of on the side.
Right.
Their voices weren't being heard enough or something. I'm not sure. I don't know. This is just from what Andrew showed at the presentation.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the Chiefs have an entirely different story of what's going on.
There's three sides to every story, correct? And we got one side of it, and it still, it seemed pretty new, only a couple months old. So I'm sure they're still kind of thinking about it. But the other positives I was thinking was trying to not use herbicides, and I think they were not doing scarifying on the land, trying to find different techniques that work with Indigenous people. And I think there were some positives out of it, but then it's kind of unfortunate that things kind of broke down, and that's just as we said, big messy process. So
but it's heading in the right direction, right? Like, it's gonna unfortunately it's gonna take a long time, and I think Indigenous communities are going to continue to suffer until we sort this out,
right?
And like we were saying the whole time, we have the ability to do this, so let's get our hands dirty, and just understand this is going to be hard. We're going to fail. There's going to be emotion. It's going to be uncomfortable. But let's do this. This is how you make a difference, right? This is how we can start to see one another as equals on the landscape, as land stewards, right? So I saw a lot of positives from it, and I hope people take what Andrew's group did, and they can take a bunch of stuff from that and try to incorporate that into their own methodology, right? Because there's
and it was it was a very ambitious project, and there's so many people involved, and there were a lot of positives that came out of it. It's just unfortunate that it's not continuing, but that's
That doesn't mean that there won't be a new program in the future,
right?
I'm sure this isn't the end of them trying to do that. I'm sure that they've got something again already in the thought process of trying to figure out, how can we do this better? How can we re-engage? How can we? Because it's not like they go, well, it didn't work and we're done now forever, and we'll just do what we want. It's like, no, I guarantee that's not what's going on.
Right? They're still talking. Hopefully.
They're definitely still, or at least on the Tokul side of it, they're definitely concerned. They showed initiative. They've put lots of money into this. They want to make sure that this works, and they have just as much incentive to do this, right? Like they want to make sure that this happens. They want sustainable ecology and forests forever, the same as Indigenous communities, right? So it's interesting to see we can have so much in common, but yet so much difference in our understanding of reality, right? Our recognition of how the world works is extremely different, even though we kind of want the same things,
right?
And but we're having trouble relating that experience, right? It's tough.
Absolutely. It's good if you want to, I guess what you call it, like a wicked problem, where it's just there may not be a right solution, and people like problem solving and trying to make a difference. This is quite an interesting topic.
It's huge. It's ridiculous. There was Patricia at the end, Pat McCormick,
right?
She talked a bunch about, and I did that whole Good Fire podcast series on Indigenous cultural burning and that kind of stuff with Amy Christensen, and I should say it was hers, and I was tagging along.
Right,
I was the tech guy.
Right,
but
the equipment.
I learned a lot from that. And Patricia's talk. She's written a few books, and she's a professor emeritus of the U of A as well through
Native Studies,
and she gave a really cool talk about Indigenous burning up north of the Peace River, up in the woodlands, or Wood Buffalo National Park and north of there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talking about how you can from the sources, like from reading sources and photos and that kind of stuff, you can tell that whole landscape, so 1910, 1920s, Indigenous burning was prohibited.
Right. Any anthropogenic fires were outlawed, and they started suppressing fires instead of letting them burn.
And so you can see that up until that point, there was this, like we said at the very beginning, this mosaic landscape of like lots of grassland. It was a parkland landscape with aspen and grass and all kinds of stuff, and lots of grazing area.
Right.
And that was there. Patricia had said that there was argument about why it was like that. Some people had said it was because of the soil, but now we know that in those same places there is a thriving boreal mixedwood.
Right.
So it's clearly must not have been the soil, and they've come to realize that was because of Indigenous burning.
Right.
Constant, every couple of years they were burning it, keeping the saplings down, keeping the grass open,
right.
And so that entire area, which is now a homogeneous carpet of trees,
right,
used to be mostly grass.
Exactly.
And that wasn't because that was the natural way of things. That was because Indigenous people were on the land, and that also promoted a massive bison community, right? And like all kinds of incredible types of biota. And it was interesting to hear her very specific example of that. Right. Of here, I have proof that, Wood Buffalo National Park used to be mostly grassland.
Right. It's first-hand accounts and photos of early explorers. I think some of her accounts were from the late 1700s, talking about Indigenous burning, which is a long history of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a game changer. I was really excited when I learned when I ran into Pat and had great conversations. She's a great lady to talk to, and just has so much energy for her age. She's a really nice lady, and
very well thought out. She's spent some serious time thinking about these issues and putting them into context and being very fair about it too.
Yes.
Like she's not. I don't think she's pointing any fingers in unfair directions. She's being very honest about it. And
pretty judicious about it, and she points to maybe like ignorance on white culture of
I would say
definitely
ignorance on white culture.
Like the suppression of like fire suppression and everything. Like, why are we putting so much effort into suppressing all these fires? Like, obviously, it helps timber supply and things like that. But then in other cases, like maybe it is okay to kind of let it burn and everything. And I guess one important thing to note about Indigenous burning is that it's not at the same time as typical wildfires might happen with hot, dry, and windy, and that's from lightning or whatever. But the Indigenous fires are done in the springtime when maybe the grass is still kind of or the ground is still kind of moist, and so the fires aren't as intense. And so it wasn't some kind of just like careless native person just lighting a fire because they thought it was fun. It was thought out, and it was a cultural practice.
It's a prescribed burn, right? As well as a cultural burn. Like there was cultural purposes besides just the ecology of it, right? Yeah. It was fascinating for me to see that specific example, right? Because it was like, haha, like here is like some very evident proof that this was what was going on. Right. And I don't know, and honestly, I don't know what we do about that, because it's like now we've created this situation where we haven't had fire. We have this 100 years build up of fuel, and we're like, well, we should just let fire back on the landscape. It's shit, we sure got ourselves in a pickle here.
Yeah, that's a different fire. That's definitely different than what it is, right? And I mean, we have things like like fire smarting, an issue like vegetative thinning and things like that, and like mulching. They do mulching things. So, I mean, I don't know if these are all correct answers. They're just like, let's get some ideas on the table here.
Start thinking about it and try to change it somehow. We've created this landscape. We think that it's natural, right? But the reality is that Indigenous people have been here since time immemorial, and there's an argument to say that the boreal forest has evolved with their presence.
Right, absolutely. And other forests in North and South America, and maybe all over the world.
Probably the entire world, I would imagine. People have been around for a while.
Yeah.
And to say that, we need to like put it in a park and protect it is like, that was another point that Peggy asked of Pat was, like, we need to be careful of just creating parks for the sake of protection, because that's not including the Indigenous, which is the indigenous role in there, right? Which was obviously a massive part of that ecology. And we seem to, that could solve a lot of the ecological problems that we're seeing. We don't know, like unless we start trying, right? And I don't mean we. I mean, the indigenous communities need to start trying, but they need to be allowed and not put in prison for doing this.
for starting fires and such. And then so like think of
obviously in a controlled environment with the right people. I'm not saying that indigenous people should be throwing matches at, but that's not what they would be doing, right? But it's like, I think that's the perception that I think Western culture would have, right?
Well, it's a different ballgame now because we have, you got the roads and you got houses and you got all kinds of things. And then, if you talk to an ecologist, fire's great. But then if you talk to like a lawyer or an insurance agent there, and then you try to explain like a serratinous cone to them and that, they don't care that, oh my gosh, look, everything's going to burn down. And, but then there's forestry operations going up there, high prairie, there's a mill there in High Prairie. I'm assuming it got its name because it used to be a prairie. And then, you cut that down. You cut down an area and then you replant forests. Like what if indigenous people want it to be a grassland for bison? Like, can we accommodate? Like, I think so.
Yeah, and it's amazing because we're in a totally different era now.
Yeah.
Totally different era where it's not like there's so much that needs to change. But I think it was an interesting point of that Pat made, right? Was that like, look, this is the role that indigenous people had, part of the role, and we need to realize that this was real, accept it, and try to help move in that direction because I don't think it's ever going to be what it was, right? But we're going somewhere new. Let's go somewhere new where we have this collaboration of two cultures merging and becoming something that, allows for independent cultures to exist peacefully and collaboratively.
Yeah, and also kind of interacting with nature instead of leaving it alone and just like, no, you can be a part of it and have, induce positive changes onto the environment. And I think, in my, just not too extensive research on it, just, kind of passive interest on reading, one paper I found, which is really interesting, was that upon the introduction of white people, I guess Columbus in 1492, and then there were, conquistadors and all these people like bringing diseases and everything, 90% of native population in North and South America was wiped off. So their civilization was literally decimated. And as a result, agricultural land kind of returned to forest. And so by the 1600s, there was a mini ice age, and that was caused because so much agricultural land was turned back into forest that it removed so much CO2 from the air that it caused this mini ice age.
Really?
True story.
That's bananas.
Yeah. So we are.
I did not know about that.
And then so we got to realize that we're in the Anthropocene, right? That we're in a human era. Or an era dominated by human activity. So the environment and climate is all, result of any changes are probably because of human activity. And if you read the paper on it, they haven't come to a consensus yet on what specific point the Anthropocene started, right? So they have several things like the agricultural revolution, like large amounts of agriculture that changed the climate, and that was on the ice records. You can see that. You can see a spike in methane from rice, and an increase in rice production. And then the other one was that human activity did cause a change in our climate. And that was one of the things was introduction of white people to North and South America. So then we think of all these like virgin forests in North America, and it's just like, were they like, maybe 500 years ago it was agricultural land, maybe it was some kind of city or something.
God, we really don't know what the hell we're doing.
So once I kind of started researching that, it was just like, wow, I think is a game changer, because then one, we can interact with the environment, and two, like when we, do forestry operations, what do we return it to? Do we just, we cut down a bunch of white spruce, like let's plant more white spruce? Like what was it like 200 years ago? And is this causing, food insecurity for indigenous communities because there's not really many bison left. So that's an interesting puzzle, that's for sure. And that was, like I said, one of the topics was finding indigenous knowledge and Western practices, and kind of where can you find common ground and hopefully reduce some of the issues that we have. So
for sure.
I guess the end of Pat's thesis was that it was she didn't get a chance to talk about bison, but maybe she wants another shot at talking, so maybe we can get her on a Phil's lecture or something like that. But she was talking about how we didn't have these massive like wildfires that we do now, and it's it's easy to say, oh, it's because of climate change, but then it's like, oh, what about fire suppression as well? And she's pointing to, wildfires in Fort McMurray and Slave Lake, I believe, and just overgrown forests, and then and also in California, and also in Australia, and these are all areas where previously there was a lot of indigenous burning. So,
well, I think that was the point, right? Not necessarily fire suppression, because like I think people would point to that as like wildfire suppression,
right?
It's fire suppression, period. So the complete suppression of indigenous burning, and then total suppression of wildfires as much as possible as well.
Right.
So it was just this total like war on fire, period, which was the problem, right? Like it's
yep. And that's a European forestry practice, and maybe it works well in Europe, but in other areas like fire-prone regions like us, maybe we need to rethink that. And especially when there's, indigenous communities and other communities that are stuck in these middle of the forest, and things like Fort McMurray could definitely be a part of our future, and we got to be proactive on these things. So
it's interesting, right? Because it's like now we've put ourselves in this situation, and I've talked about this a million times on the podcast, where like we have this buildup of fuel, and it's this powder keg situation where we have no choice but to continue to suppress fire.
Right.
However, in the interim, we have the ability to maybe start applying. I mean, they do apply fire. There is prescribed burning. It's not like this hasn't been going on, but it hasn't been going on to the extent that the indigenous people used to do it, right? And it's creating it's. So I think there's plenty of room for this to start coming back into the system, working its way in, not in a way where it's just like the government doing prescribed fires, but the government can continue to do prescribed fires from a fuel reduction standpoint. But if we can formulate some kind of system that allows for indigenous communities to do the burning they need to do to support their culture, and also maybe rebuild the ecology. You know what I mean? To what and yeah. Anyways, I could talk about that forever because there's a whole thing on that.
Yeah, but, and I guess one thing I want to talk about is the in my community ecology class, but I took school in Florida. Was the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, that if you kind of leave an environment and there's not much disturbances, it becomes kind of decadent and less biodiversity. But if you introduce disturbances to the landscape, it actually increases biodiversity. So something to keep in mind. But yeah, I'm glad we had Sonia talking about actually putting fire back on the landscape, and her whole presentation was pretty spectacular.
It was awesome. Yeah,
I'm glad there's people out there that she kind of gets it. I think she came from a wildfire background, so she came from Jen Beverly's lab, I believe. So that's wildfire analytics and things like that. So
so she had an entire indigenous crew up in northern BC applying prescribed fire back on the landscape and doing a bunch of this from I'm not sure if it was if they were doing cultural burns. It didn't sound like it. There was more prescribed burning, with like indigenous crews and that kind of stuff. But it's heading that direction, right? And I know that's got to be the motivation for doing this, and that was really, really cool to see that happening, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the kind of knowledge on the topic of indigenous burning, a lot of it has been lost, but you could be rediscovered, right? And Henry Lewis, I think both of them Pat and Sonia both talked about the work of Henry Lewis here at the U of A. He's since passed, but he has a couple of videos. You can find him online. One of them was the Fires of Spring, and they had accounts. I mean, the video is old. It looks like it's from the 60s or 70s maybe, and pretty grainy footage, but they're talking about elders, talking about, this area right here used to be, kind of a grassland, and now it's just all thick bush, and talking about some of the cultural practices. So I think, a lot with like fire suppression and things like that, I think a lot of that knowledge may have been lost. Maybe it's hidden somewhere. But yeah, I think, Sonia did talk about how she has been reaching out to certain communities, and there has been kind of like a resurgence of interest in that. So I don't think it's dead. I don't think it's gone.
For sure. Yeah. Talking to Amy Christensen, it sounds like there's still a lot of knowledge there, a lot of interest there, a lot of understanding. But she says the same thing, right? She says, yeah, of course, with you know what I mean, the stripping of culture for 90 years or whatever it was, there's going to be some knowledge that's been lost to the fray, but it doesn't that doesn't mean that it's all gone, right? It doesn't mean
Right.
that it can't be, again, like you said, regained, and it's something that I think it's important, like it's imperative that this does happen, because it's obviously part of the ecology.
Yep.
And to have people suffering because we don't allow their culture to succeed is pretty messed up, right?
Yeah. Yep, I agree, and I think, I mean, I wanted to bring the topic up, but I figured I should kind of keep a low profile. But I was just wondering if Indigenous burning was a human right, and then
Sure.
how do we accommodate that?
True. Well, especially under the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People.
Right,
UNDRIP.
right, and it was, I guess what was the terminology they used where it was like a free, basically self-determination. That's what it was.
Free, prior, and informed consent.
Yeah, the one was self-determination. The other was free, prior, and informed consent.
Yeah.
So, but then, how do we accomplish that? I think forestry companies could definitely help in that in terms of, thinning and fire smarting, and, also independent contractors. And that's I think a great way for people to work together. And I don't know, I get offended when people call me a firebug. Like, no, I'm a pyromaniac. Like, I like fires, and there's just something about it. Like, I just think it's kind of ingrained in who we are as humans, and to just like suppress that. And we're having all these issues now. Like, maybe we need to rethink this. Like, we're in the 21st century now. Like, let's let's take a look at this. I think I think it'll be a lot of fun. But Sonia had a lot of interesting techniques, and I don't think she talked about any mishaps or fires getting out of control or anything like that. But she gets a lot of flack from government officials and citizens for lighting fires and things like that.
Well, it's misunderstanding, right? Like, it's, I mean, informed populace is a tough one to try to get.
Absolutely. But props to her for kind of fighting back and kind of doing the right thing and working with Indigenous people, and I think she was a good example of relationship building and those kinds of things. And she had some pretty cool photos of some of those big fires that she was doing.
Awesome. No, she's great. I'm hoping to get her on if she ever comes to Alberta to do some stuff, and we can talk about doing one of those prescribed burns, right? Like, it'd be neat.
Oh yeah. I don't want to speak for her, but I think probably shouldn't. Never mind. She'll be back in Alberta eventually, right, Sonia?
I spoke to her a little bit.
We had to talk.
So, I guess all in all, like, we had, personally, what I took away from it was, like, I kind of already said it, but I came into it going like, okay, we're all coming together as a group. We want to accomplish this goal of having a working landscape in collaboration with different cultures, and try to support the growth and enhancement of that culture to a point where it you know what I mean? It's back to its former glory or some such thing, right?
Right.
And then getting there and hearing all the people talk, especially the Indigenous people talk, and their perspective on the problems that they're seeing, it became very evident that, like I said, there's a huge disconnect. The perspectives are so far off. And although we in Western society think that we're doing a lot, we may be from our perspective, but it's very, very clear that from the Indigenous perspective, and calling it from Indigenous people's perspective that I heard from, that they're not seeing that. It's not that there's a big disconnect, so we need to do more. And we have the ability and capacity, in quotation marks, to do more. And I think it's our responsibility and obligation to do more. And I believe in the forest industry and the forest and the government and the people in there to do the right thing. I'm not saying all of this as a way to be like, shame on all of you, right? Like, I'm part of this, right?
Yeah, we're all part of it. So we're all in it together.
Totally. But I really think that we can do it. And I think it's heading in that direction. I think it's going to get there. I think that Indigenous people would like it to get there a hell of a lot faster.
Oh yeah.
And I can't blame them. And I just hope that we can continue to have open, honest conversations. And when we find ourselves having emotional reactions or frustrations with some of these processes, to maybe step back and ask ourselves why,
right,
and where that other person is coming from, right? So,
Yeah. And I mean, I talked to several other people and they were asking me like, how did you get so many like Indigenous people like into this tech session? And I was like, well, they came to me. It was like once people found out about it, it just kind of came together. And because other people have had a lot of problems getting Indigenous people to come together. So I think it's just like they're a little more willing to speak up and things like that. So it's definitely time to take this issue seriously. And I think it'd be enormously beneficial for everyone.
For everyone.
If we
and we could do it. And I think everyone is on the same page as far as like wanting to do it. It's just a matter of how. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, this is awesome, man. It was awesome. It was like such a great conference. I've never been to a forestry conference where I've been so engaged. Like usually you go to, you know what I mean? You go to some kind of 8-hour event and you're going to have some talkers who are a little more, maybe not all that engaging or not that, you know what I mean? You're not really interested in that subject, but I found myself at the edge of my seat the entire time.
Yeah.
It was just lots and lots of good stuff. And it was, it managed to change my perspective a bunch and change my opinion and kind of see both sides of it as much as I kind of can. And, I'm very optimistic. Like I think that it's good, but I think I don't blame Indigenous peoples for being pessimistic about the situation if they are, and for not entrusting in the process, right?
Yeah.
I don't blame them for that.
Because it wasn't their system, right? It's our system, and we think it's going to work for them, and
we're imposing it on them, right? It's
right.
pretty unfair. So it's it's speaking of that, I have no idea how to conclude that thought, but
yeah, it's a big issue, but there's a lot of people working on it, and I think there's a lot of good-hearted people, and I think changing people's mentality on things is really important. It's not just all about just making money and things like that. There are, when we're doing these forestry operations, there's people's lives that we have to consider. Yeah. So, it's worth the effort. And, there's going to be lots of highs and lows, and it's going to be messy. But I think, we'll look back like 20, 30 years from now and be pretty proud of, the things that we accounhed.
Yeah. Be a lot of hitting it in the rough, but eventually we'll get it on the green.
Let's hope so. I think, I have a positive outlook on things.
I do too. I have an optimistic outlook, but I'm also not living in the communities that are dealing with this, right? So it's, we got a ways to go. We got a long ways to go, but we have to start. We have to start now. That's very evident.
Exactly. And we need Indigenous people to speak up and come talk to us. I think there's a lot of good-hearted people out there that are willing to listen and kind of take the message to heart and things like that. So,
and on that note, I think we have to go to them more than they have to come to us, right? Like I think it's our responsibility to do a little bit more of that, not just kind of at the 11th hour, like we were saying, right?
Right.
We have to go out and build this relationship, become friends with the people in these communities, like become friends with them, have them so you can text them on a text basis.
Right.
And like this will become super easy instead of being uncomfortable because, I'm sure at these meetings, both people are uncomfortable because they don't know what the other one's intentions are.
Right.
They don't know where they're coming from. They don't have their perspective. So like both sides are uncomfortable and feel weird about it.
Right.
But if we can go and start this at the early onset of planning, then you can take that away. And now you're just friends shooting the bull about how your cultures are different and how we can start to communicate and relate them so that they can both succeed, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's... Yeah.
I think that's April Connolly in the panel discussion talked about kind of going in with curiosity and realizing that it's not this like blanket, Indigenous people, all the cultures the same. There's tons of different cultures like within our province. And I think that could be really celebrated because if it just, we have our culture here and then you go out and they're doing things differently and they have a different perspective. And just anyone to, kind of widen the horizon is just a good thing to do. Right.
Totally. So, yeah. The difference and that's what I was saying about saying the Indigenous perspective. It's like, that's super disingenuous to say that. It's like it's un-Indigenous perspective and that there's multiple, obviously, just like every person has their own perspective, but trying to group it all together, it's even that is problematic, right? So it's interesting. Every time you turn around, you go, like you're showing your biases, your ignorance, you're fool. And it's just like, there's only so much we can do. We're sorting it out. We're getting there. As long as we continue to be, like you said, curious and have that hunger and desire to learn more and to try to incorporate our understanding and their understanding, and try to find a better understanding of reality so we can move forward together.
Yeah, we're all humans, so, and humans make mistakes. And
what a conversation. Good Lord.
Okay. It was a lot of fun. We should talk about Curtis's work and Matt's work as well. Mm-hmm. So Curtis, through Tree Time, had a conversation about archaeology and kind of bridging the gap, because I guess there's FMA holders. I'm not sure, do like the forestry companies have to do archaeological surveys?
My understanding is yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's also Indigenous Consultation, but then there's the archaeology people aren't talking to the Indigenous people just yet, and whose shoulder those falls on or whatever is for debate, I guess.
Well, and I think Curtis said 99% of the sites that they find are Indigenous historical sites.
Right.
So and that was another thing he said. He said a lot of times they'll bring stuff back to the lab to assess it, and that. But like he said, the majority of the time, I think he said the majority of the time, they'll take a couple samples, they'll try to figure out how big the site is and where it is, and kind of flag it off, make sure it's not disturbed, and then they'll try to leave it as is, which I thought was interesting, because that's something that Indigenous communities may not know about, right? But if they were to know about where their culture has been, you know what I mean? That could provide a lot of pride and a lot of, a lot of, you know what I mean? A lot of hope and a lot of just, pride, I guess, in their culture and kind of, and where it's been and what it's accomplished. And it's,
pretty interesting. And then there's another example of trying to sneak in, because you set up a table of arrowheads and such by yourself. You're not going to get a lot of attention, but they went to some kind of community event and also went to a gun show so I like that, because forestry I don't think is high on a lot of people's radars. It's just might get in the news once a year or something like that, and they don't really think about what's going on. So engaging people like that is I like that.
It's pretty awesome.
Like that perspective, and trying to engaging Indigenous people, and looking at their cultural heritage and things like that. And was he talking about one of the cabins had baby formula in it?
Yeah, he said it was interesting doing archaeology because it curbed his expectations a lot. Right? Because he said he found baby formula at one of these remote cabins in the middle of nowhere, and he's like, "Well, I didn't expect that." Right?
Right. It's still pretty new.
Yeah. Well, and part of what I found interesting was that up until, and this is what he had said, up until around the 1980s, it was largely understood in the scientific, literature that the boreal forest was largely an uninhabited zone. Right.
Yeah.
And then obviously somebody had some qualms with that. And obviously the Indigenous people knew that that's not true.
They weren't listening. Nobody was listening.
Yeah. So. They obviously were very aware that their whole ancestors lived back there. Right. And they still continue to do so. And, but through the literature and the scientific research has shown through all the archaeological finds that no, this is equally as populated as the plains.
Right.
It's just a different thing. And the reason we don't find as many sites because it's more complicated. There's trees. It's not like you can depend on the farmer to stumble across, you know what I mean?
Right.
Some old pottery or whatever. It's just not going to happen.
Right. It's all overgrown, and got to get in there. And there's, I think in the last 20 years, there's more archaeology sites in the boreal forest compared to the plains. So kudos to him. That's a pretty good accomplishment.
It's awesome. But it definitely changes. It helps provide the perspective for Western society, because again, Indigenous communities and people, I'm sure, know this already. This is not something. This is a perfect example of what of giant gaps of information where Western science and Western culture were like, we know what's going on. Yes, I've got my cup of tea.
Yeah.
I've done the research. I know what I'm talking about.
Oh, right.
And obviously we had no damn clue what we were talking about. And meanwhile, the Indigenous communities all knew this. They're fully aware. So what else do they know? What knowledge do they have that can help us better understand our reality, our world?
Yeah, right? And just even foraging, ability to forage. Everyone now just works their jobs and gets food from the grocery store, and it's just I think some elements of subsistence living could be incorporated in all of our lives, and learning how to kind of reconnect with nature and stuff. Who else is going to help us do that? They need to save us, because we're oh, we have all this organic food now at the grocery store, and it's like, well, they've had organic food, and then
we call it food.
They had really good food, and then now that food insecurity is an issue for them. So
it's fascinating. I thought that was an incredible example, an aha moment for me of being like, look, do you think this is the last piece of Indigenous knowledge that we don't have an understanding of? Like, that would be pretty ridiculous of us to assume that, like, well, that was the last piece. They don't. It's like, no, I'm sure that there's plenty there that we don't understand, right? And it's up to us to create a situation where they feel comfortable enough to share that knowledge that we're not going to hold that against them, and as our ancestors have and our predecessors have, right? So we have to. Yeah, if we want to really understand our reality better, then we need them, right? Like they're part of this. They have an understanding that we can't possibly come around to understanding. So slowly over time, over talking to like Fabian and talking to Heather and to other people in my life that come from an Indigenous background, it becomes evident that those who have somehow managed to retain their culture and managed to hold on to bits and pieces of it, and I say bits and pieces because it's almost all fractured, right? And so they're trying to collect their culture again too, and try to and revive it, right? From the ashes that was residential schools and all that other stuff, but it came across very clearly that they're not going to cut you off a whole bunch. You know what I mean? Like, they're very thoughtful. That when, in their culture, it seems like when they're talking, you listen. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is meaningful. I'm not just saying this because my ego is trying to fill your ears with how great I am. This is me saying something because I've thought about it. I have a realization, and I want to share it with you so that you may share in that information. But it's something that has come out of their culture, whereas our culture has promoted this like egotistical, puff up your chest and like, I'm the best, look at me, right? And so it's like, I think we could learn a whole hell of a lot.
I have all the answers, and that's one of the things Heather talked about in our planning was we wanted to incorporate something like this. It's called a sharing circle, and we thought about it, but we figured with 100 people and a lot of things to say, it could go on for days and days and days, but basically, the idea is get people together and everyone just kind of speaks their mind, and it's just one person at a time. And she said it's really good exercise because there's some introverted people and they get talked over a bunch all the time, and all of a sudden they just they say something just completely brilliant, and it's just been up here in their mind the whole time. And because you might have some issues where these extroverted people just go on and on and on. It's like, no, shut up, like let other people talk too.
That's me. Sorry about that, guys. You ever notice that I just talk from my ass regularly?
So the idea of the sharing circle was to get everybody's idea, and that was another thing Heather talked about in our discussions was how like their governance and how they worked was it's kind of like seemed like a bicameral system where basically what she had told me was that like a chief and that kind of stuff was maybe kind of like a Western, like, oh, who's in charge? Like, oh, the chief is. But the idea is that there's a council of men who come to certain ideas or management or whatever for 7 generations, and they come to a consensus. It's not like a vote. It's more of a consensus thing. But then it goes to the upper chamber, the grandmas. They're the ones that are really kind of in charge of things. And they also, Heather said that they're because the grandmas are more connected and the females in general are more connected with the creator. Those were her words. And I think it's really interesting. It's totally different of our culture, where it's just like kind of like an individual idea and like one person being a hero and having all of these answers and everything. So we wanted to incorporate some kind of sharing circle, but we figured it would it could go on for days and days, because it's one of those things that people keep talking until everyone's like content. And
Yeah.
figured, if we had like 3 weeks, maybe we could have done something like that. But I think it was a great idea of like some kind of communication exercise.
Yeah, especially when you get buttheads like me going in there with just like, yeah, well, I have this thought, and it's kind of half baked.
Yeah,
but let's discuss it.
It's really important.
Yeah,
I thought about it, so it's super important. Yeah. But that's extroverted people, right? They
totally
speak out loud and then change their mind later and things like that. And the introverted people just kind of hold on to things. So I think that the idea of the sharing circle is to get into introverted people to be more.
I love that.
More open.
But that's part of what I love about like sharing of cultures, right? Is that we're starting to recognize that like, hey, just because we do things a certain way doesn't mean we should continue to do things this way, right? Tradition is it's sure it's great, but like there's a lot you can learn from opening your eyes and experiencing something new.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. Oh, that's how we've always done it. Like, and I'm more progressive and think, no, we need constant change and constant improvement. And sometimes you try to make an improvement and it's not good, and then you try something else, and then it might work better. But just kind of settling and saying, oh, that's how we've always done it is it's dangerous in my opinion.
Totally. Yeah. It's I love these conversations because they can go wherever, and it's. I just love having them. I love that I had the opportunity to go to that conference and to hear from those people all their perspectives and all their concerns, and to relate that back to the failures in forestry and wherever else, right? And the successes as well. Right. Plenty of successes too. Yeah, like we said, I was very, very grateful to be able to be a part of that, and it was awesome. And I would love to do it again. And I recommend that anybody. So when's the video's going up, right? At some point?
Yeah. So we're working on that now, and I don't really have a definitive timeline. Obviously, as quickly as possible, but it'll probably be after the holiday season. Okay. So we're working on that now.
Were the question and answer periods in there too, or was it just the presentations?
Oh yeah, just the question and answer periods, and yeah, the whole thing, the whole day.
The whole thing, like that woman's.
Oh yeah,
it's gonna be in there. Perfect.
I'll ensure that it's in there. That's for sure, because that's part of it.
Lots where I think all the good conversation happened was during people asking questions and the response. Right, that was the meat of it. Like the presentation was the context, and then the questions were the meat of the conversation.
Right. Yep. So it'll be out, and we'll send it on an email to, I guess, the attendees. But for those that didn't attend, it will be on our new CIF website. So that's CIFRMS.org. I guess CIF/RMS.org. And that's that. And we'll probably revisit this topic. I think it was pretty big and pretty big response. So yeah, we definitely have to revisit this again. Obviously, we didn't cover everything that we wanted to, and I think there's a lot of just so much more we could learn, right?
It should almost be an annual thing, really. Like, it's just like...
Don't tell me to do that, man.
Come on, Nathan, you can do it. You come back up from the States and put this thing on.
Sure. Why not? I don't have a life. I might as well do something like this to fill my time. But yeah, that's exciting, and I guess check out CIF, everyone. And our next tech session is going to be something around timber supply. So I guess there are kind of some rumblings about how sustainable yield isn't really like an effective model, and in BC and in here, and I've heard other cases, and so people are trying to rethink that. And so instead of we cut down white spruce, let's plant white spruce. Is that the right thing to do, or should we plant aspen, or should we, leave it to grassland?
I just had a podcast about that with Phil Como.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
It's called Changing Regeneration is what we called it. But it was Phil talking all about that, right? Maybe changing to a successional model of regeneration might be the route, and some of the ways we could do that, right?
Right.
So that's a huge one.
Yeah, cool. So I mean, I think there's other topics. So right now, I don't think the policy includes. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it includes things like issues like timber loss from wildfire, or insects, or drought or whatnot. It's just kind of cut one tree down, plant one tree of the same species, and that's definitely needs some reform. So I think
that's the general idea. It's more complicated, but that's the general idea.
Right,
for sure. Yeah, that's generally what we do, mostly because that's what will grow there, right? But it's when you talk about the succession of it, it changes, right? So so it's anyways. We'll get into that. If you want to know about that stuff, go to the last episode that I released.
Great,
we talk all about it. But yeah, no, that was incredible. I really enjoyed it, and I hope we can get more engagement and intense conversations like this, because it gets people thinking. It forces people out of their comfort zone.
Yep.
Gets them to change their opinions. And
that's it.
Definitely did so for me.
Yeah. Don't settle for comfort. We can't wait for some genius to come up with a miracle. You're not going to hit a home run or a grand slam every day. Even with this, there was a lot of dead ends and wrong turns and a lot of frustration. And I'm glad it turned out well, and I'm glad it's over with, so I feel a lot more relaxed.
Yeah, no, it was good, man. You did an awesome job.
Great.
So thanks for coming on. This is a good. I think this is a good. It was kind of a word soup, I guess. I was wondering how we were going to organize this conversation, but I think we got there.
Yeah,
we got there.
Jump from one idea to another, and maybe it'll come back to where we started, and maybe it'll go somewhere else.
It's a common theme.
Yeah,
but yeah, this is awesome, man. Thanks for coming on.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is perfect.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you guys liked that. I really, really enjoyed that conference, Indigenous Consultation Conference, put on by the Canadian Institute of Forestry, and it was an awesome conversation with Nathan. Yeah, what a subject, hey? I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening. Rate and review on iTunes and Spotify, all that good stuff. It really helps me out. If you guys have any questions, concerns, or whatever, shoot me an email, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com. I'll get back to you. So take it easy, guys. We'll catch you next time.